On a cold December morning, in the cruel winter of 1777, a man stood alone in the woods, his eyes looking up towards heaven. His men at camp were weary, the war's outcome was looking bleak, but on bended knee he took comfort, he knew in whom to seek. Still early in this epic contest, only the year before it was begun, an old soldier of the coming republic, face emblazoned by the rays from the sun. In the most sublime moment of your history, seeking counsel and wisdom for the fight, with a sword not of steel but of the spirit, your first president humbled himself at dawn's first light. It wasn't a perfect religion, his faith was greater than his kin, but whatsoever is born of me cannot continue in sin. When Lincoln studied my word by candlelight, laying up my sayings in store, as your nation divided against itself, wasn't it my wisdom in his heart that brought you through the war? At Boston Harbor, in the cradle of your revolution, when your soldiers were left without any way to retreat, didn't your General Washington acknowledge my hand in the matter when I sent a wind to stave off defeat? At the Battle of Midway, after Pearl Harbor, when your enemies crossed the sea, wasn't it I who opened the clouds at the exact moment that you needed it so that you spotted the Japanese fleet to help keep you free? At Saratoga or Ticonderoga, they prayed before they won, after chaplains were placed over the regiments, and they bowed their will to my son. After the victory at Trenton, when the British brought more into the fold, and the temperature plummeted to freeze the ground, giving you a way out as a result of the cold. When the Continental Army was outnumbered, at the Battle of Long Island, trapped against the East River with nowhere to go, and a sudden fog came in to hide you so that you slipped away before General Howe would even know. In the closing stages of the war, at Yorktown, before the peace would take shape, and Cornwallis tried to cross the York River, but a storm came to block his escape. Wasn't it I who left the fingerprints, and the participants in these engagements had this sense, and they credited me as I watched over you through each of these events? John Adams called me the great legislator. Robert E. Lee's faith was admired by his men. Daniel Webster said education is useless without the Bible. Stonewall Jackson prayed again and again. William Bradford recognized providence in the life of the Plymouth colony, with the Geneva Bible aboard the Mayflower as they braved the waves and the wind in the sea. Was there some other God that they called upon as they crossed the ocean to come to these shores? Or in the midst of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when they gathered in churches and cathedrals and prayed to avert a war? When the Delaware was crossed, where the Hessians gathered, and your enemies stood on the opposite sides of the shore? Do you attribute it to mere chance that the fog came and covered you, so that you went on to win the war? In the War of 1812, when the British occupied Washington, D.C., do you think it was a mere coincidence that a tornado came through the very next day, so that the British decided to get in their ships and flee? In the heat of July at the Constitutional Convention, when the delegates gathered there at Independence Hall, wasn't it your Ben Franklin who said that if a sparrow cannot fall without my notice, is it probable that without me you would ever have risen at all? Jefferson was thought by many to be a deist, but he did not cut up the Bible because he thought it wasn't true. He used those passages for missionary work to the Indians, and on page 385 of his own writings, he referred to himself as a disciple of Christ too. Your first Chief Justice said to prefer Christians as rulers. Samuel Adams acknowledged me as the great lawgiver too. And even before the Continental Congress called for days of fasting and prayer, wasn't it I who set my love upon you? When the moon stood still over Ayalon, and Joshua commanded the sun so that there was light for his men, as I fought for the children of Israel at every step of the way, wasn't I there for you then? When Patrick Henry stood before the delegates of Virginia, in his address he invoked my name, and as he spoke with the prose of independence, wasn't it I who set that man aflame? When Teddy Roosevelt's heart was broken because he lost his mother and his wife, as he sought the solitude of the Dakotas, wasn't it I who gave that man new life? In your later years, after I set you on high among the nations, in a Cold War that could have brought about the end, didn't your President Reagan walk with me at his ranch? And I called that man my friend. But you took my kindness lightly, after your blessings came from above. And though it broke my heart to see it, you left your first and greatest love. In your arrogance, you corrupted knowledge. You legitimized depravity and called it just. Your young men and women lived carelessly. They bowed down to the gods of pleasure and lust. You slaughtered the innocent by the millions. You called it a choice to excuse it too. Rampant violence, pornography, or sexual immorality, as of filth, the stench in my nostrils grew. From the Appalachians to the Rockies, as you spread abroad across the land, in the pride of your heart you began to imagine that these things were done by your own hand. I gave you a space to repent. Shouldn't I shake you from without and within? You know too much for me to not hold you accountable. You used your freedom as a license to sin. When my people, the children of Israel, rebelled against me millennia ago, I raised up their enemies around them to correct them and bring them back to the way that they should go. The Philistines or the Assyrians executed my judgments that were due. The Babylonians for 70 years until the captivity was through. Shall I deal with you any differently after you abuse my goodness and my love? What other options am I left with but to raise up China, Russia, and Islam to bring you back to me and set your sights above? But come, let us reason together. Though your nation's sins be as scarlet, will I not make them as white as snow? If you would but turn and humble yourselves and bow your will to me as your forefathers did long ago. Call to remembrance the former days, at Jamestown where you dedicated this land, and there on the shores of Virginia Beach, you honored me with a cross in the sand. The Pilgrims, the Puritans, or the Moravians reverenced me in the tenderness of your youth. And though the foundations began to crumble, didn't I still send those who spoke the truth? Samson, Gideon, or Deborah, they judged my people when they went astray. And as your nation began to wander, didn't I send Finney, Jonathan Edwards, Whitfield, or Graham to lead you back to the perfect way? 400 years from Cape Henry, as you decide which God will reign, in your most dangerous hour, I have preserved myself, a remnant to strengthen that which remains. When my servant Elijah came before me, he cried out that he was all alone. But as I said to him, I say again, haven't I reserved the thousands of you who have not bowed to the false gods that your nation has known? In the prayer houses, or my hidden ones, those who would take my power and love to the streets, so that against the backdrop of the end of the age, your nation's work might be complete. And though the day will come when you will stand alone against the greatest evil that the world has ever seen, if you would rend your hearts, your union would last, while the stars remain beyond the firmament sheen. Shafts of light over each city of refuge, as my glory comes down from heaven to earth, as the sons and daughters of true liberty take their place, and a nation fulfills the purpose for which it was birthed.